Good day, good people. Welcome to the Life Edit Project podcast. As always, I am your host and your very favorite podcast host, Elizabeth Burrows. Coach Elizabeth is what they call me. I'm very excited to have you here. This is a special episode of the Life Edit Project podcast, particularly because I have a special guest with me today. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But we are wrapping up our mental health mini series that we've been doing for the entire month of May. I don't know when you're listening to this, but this is May of 2024. Hopefully, you will be finding this podcast for years to come. So just want to put that into context for you. Also, this is a special episode because not only will this be available on all of the audio podcast platforms, but because I have a special guest, I'm also doing a video recording. So you can come and look and watch this podcast over on my YouTube channel, which is absolutely going to be linked up in the show notes for you. So I'm super excited. My special guest today is Stephanie Riles, and she is also a coach. But I'm going to have her introduce herself and tell you about what her specialty is, who she works with, and what she does, because we do things a little bit different. And I'm very excited about this topic today because we are going to be talking about emotional eating and the impact of emotional eating on our mental health, or rather, how our mental health can make us turn to emotional eating. So I'm very excited about this topic. Y'all know I'm not a fitness coach, I'm not a nutrition coach in particular, so I haven't tackled anything like this on the show so far. So I'm super excited to hear what Coach Steph has to say. Coach Steph, welcome.
What's up? Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So you mentioned I am Coach Steph, registered dietitian, personal trainer, and a mindset transformation coach.
That's a lot of
Um,
things.
it is. It is. The main thing though is I coach macros and mindset. I help female perfectionists to beat self-sabotage and lose the weight for good.
That sounds amazing. I know for a fact that I have a lot of perfectionists and recovering perfectionists in my audience. I myself am a recovering perfectionist. And by that, I mean, I am no longer considering myself a perfectionist, but I do know that I can have perfectionist tendencies if I am not careful. And I know that a lot of my listeners can relate very, very heavily to that. I don't know that I have really tried to be a perfectionist when it comes to my eating habits and my nutrition. I've never been big on like dieting or anything like that. And I have generally been happy with my body. Although I will say, as I get older, it becomes more and more challenging to just be okay with things being the way they are. So,
Mhm. Yes.
you're a personal trainer, also. That's really cool. My husband is a personal trainer. I did an episode with him back on season one. We talked a little bit about that. So, I think it's really great that you've got both of those perspectives, and I'm sure you're able to help your clients a lot. Tell me, so who do you usually work with? I know perfectionists, but are you mainly working with women? What age range are they in?
Yeah, so I work with female perfectionists, so women only. And typically, because I am a Facebook girl, most of my clients are my age or older. So I am 40. So a lot of my clients range from anywhere between like 35 to like 50 or 65. I've had clients that are well, like 79
Mm,
in my group coaching program. So more on the older end where we're concerned about menopause and perimenopause, things like that.
yes, because that's when life starts to life and things get real.
Things start to change a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So let's just jump right on into today's topic. Let's talk about emotional eating. Please tell me, from your perspective, what is emotional eating? I know what I think it is, but I don't know if what my perspective is correct.
So I look at emotional eating as eating when you feel an emotion to either get away from an emotion or to feel a certain emotion. And the thing is, we all do this a little bit. So it's
Right.
not like this bad thing that we should never do. Like we are human beings and it's probably going to happen. But another telltale sign is like if you're eating when you're not hungry or when you're already full, like past the point of like, I'm satisfied and now I'm just stuffing my face because it feels better than feeling whatever I'm trying to run away from. Rewarding yourself with food is another thing that likely comes from our childhood. Um,
Can
I think
relate.
yes. Um, Feelings of safety around food, and then also feelings of like powerlessness or out of control. Like, oh my God, they brought cupcakes to the break room and I just have to have them because they're there. And, you might want to be more social or uh, there's so much dynamics in terms of that, but like I usually look at it as either you're running towards an emotion or you're trying to run away from an emotion and you're not aware of it and you don't have the tools to manage it.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. One thing you said that just really made a light bulb go off in my head was maybe eating in a social context
Hmm.
being a form of emotional eating. That has never occurred to me. So if you've worked, if listeners, if any of you have worked in an office setting or a group setting, and the culture of your workplace is to bring in food, to share food, to celebrate with group activities where food is involved, or even to go to like weekly happy hours, or throw potlucks or something during the holidays, or to go to group dinners or anything like that. There is a type of eating that you might do in context with others that you wouldn't normally do just by yourself, or if you were making your own choices just top to bottom. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and I think too, in terms of family dynamic, especially like in the African American community where we go home for, a holiday or something like that, and there's peer pressure to either drink or eat and get that second and third plate. Like it's really so that I might be uncomfortable setting a boundary and saying, "Hey, no, I don't want that second plate or I don't want that third plate." And we don't want to feel that, so we just eat it to appease other people.
That is so interesting. So sometimes the emotion isn't our own emotion that we're chasing, but we're trying to solve for the emotions of other people. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, the way that you said that, I wasn't thinking of it in that way, but I do think that's true. I think it's like, okay, I'm trying to feel an emotion. That's one thing that I think we all kind of associate emotional eating with. I'm trying to feel happy, so I'm going to eat. Or I am trying to get away from a bad emotion. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel like I am, disappointing someone who made me something. And so I don't want to feel that uncomfortability. So I'm going to eat the thing. So getting away from an uncomfortable emotion. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
that makes a lot of sense. So, one thing, I don't know if I've ever shared this on the podcast because I don't normally talk about eating, but one thing about me, so I do not eat red meat or pork. And I have not eaten red meat or pork since I was young, since like the early 90s. And so I was a kid when I made this decision. Everyone always asked, like, why don't you eat it? And there's no big story behind it. It was a random decision that I made as a kid, nothing really behind it except I decided that that was what I was going to do and I've stuck to it. And being raised in a Black household, pork was something that was on the table a lot and in food a lot, especially, around other family, lots of veggies are cooked with pork in them. And Also, my family eats, red meat. So burgers, ground beef and spaghetti kind of thing was something that we did. My mom loves a good roast, things like that. And so I do remember as a kid when I made that decision, having to, or rather, feeling a certain level of discomfort and even frustration with trying to just make my own decision about what I wanted to eat and being pressured from other people. So my parents were actually pretty chill about it. They respected it. But if I would go to, let's say, family's house for the holidays and the collard greens had, ham hocks in them, and I'd say, no, thanks. Those are made with pork. I don't eat pork. And they say, oh, well, they're just in them. You can pick out the ham hocks. It's okay. You can just go ahead and eat it. Or, what's wrong with pork? Pork's been good to us. You think you're too good to eat the pork kind of thing.
Right.
That's definitely something that happens. And yeah, that's really interesting. Hmm. So tell me, Coach Steph, is emotional eating something that you have personal experience with?
I would say yes. I think we all do. I think that it's normal. And I think in particular, when you asked me that question, I remember a specific time where I was very stressed out. This was um around COVID, like maybe a little bit before and after for sure as well. But mine was like going to Summer Moon, it's like a coffee shop, and getting a Summer Moon latte. And I was doing that when I felt stressed. I was doing it to get out of the house. I was doing it because it was like a warm, like, nutty, like,
It was
hug. I don't know.
comforting.
It was very comforting, and I realized, like, "Oh, this is emotional eating." My little coffee, and it wasn't even coffee. It's like moon milk. They call it moon milk. Nobody knows what it is, but it's so good, has a little bit of espresso in it, and when I think of my emotional eating, that's what I think of.
That's so interesting because what you're also saying is that drinking, and it doesn't even have to be alcohol, but consuming anything can be emotional eating. So even if you're drinking coffee to get a certain feeling, or if you're, let's say, drinking a milkshake, right? Like that counts as emotional eating.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if it has any calories. Like I love water, of course. It's like a no-brainer. I love water, but also like in that particular time, I just felt bad. And it was like, okay, what can I do? I was working out a lot. That's definitely a stress reliever for me, but it was also getting these summer moon lattes as well. One thing that helped me stop doing that is just looking at the nutrition facts for me, like looking at how much sugar it has in it, I'm just like, okay, let me back off of this because in my mind, I'm just like, I can't justify that. But at first, I wasn't aware that I was doing it until I was aware. And I was like, okay, now I can make a better choice.
I had a similar experience. There was a beverage that I used to get pretty often. There's this Thai restaurant that is in my hometown, and I used to work just a couple of blocks away, and so I would go to this place for lunch at least once a week. And this was back in the day. It's like before I got married, and I still like to go there, by the way, because they still exist. They're family owned and operated. I'm a big fan, but I used to get this Thai iced tea. I don't know if you've ever had a Thai iced
I
tea.
haven't.
It is a very rich and sweet beverage. It should not be called tea. It should be called dessert in a glass. So I thought nothing of it. And I would often, not all the time, but I would often get one of these Thai iced teas at this restaurant. And one day I met a friend there for lunch, and she was very health conscious, and very fit and very aware and very careful and intentional about what she put in her body. And so we're there, and I said, "Oh, have you had this Thai iced tea? It's great." And she was like, "Oh, okay, I'll try it." And so they come with the beverage, and she takes one sip, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is filled with so much sugar. This is so many calories." And she looks at me, she said, "You drink this regularly?" The level of shame that I felt, I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I don't know that I've had one since. and and it's not that I felt like I should not be doing this, but it was the fact that she called my attention to the fact that I was doing this thing without realizing it. And while I'm not super health conscious, I do like to kind of, eat and drink in a balanced way. So that was an interesting thing. So okay, tell me, so um, you mentioned that when we're eating emotionally, we are either running away from or trying to run towards a specific type of feeling. And you mentioned lots of different types of feelings. So we're trying to run away from stress, trying to run towards comfort, etc. What are some of the situations that you've seen either in yourself or in clients that you've worked with? When are people most likely to turn to emotional eating?
That's a really good question. I hear a lot from clients and from people on social media about like nighttime cravings. So it a lot of times there's a couple of things happening. So you might have emotional eating, but then superimposed on that is the fact that you may not be eating enough throughout the day anyway. And so it's so interesting when I talk to people who have cravings at night, I'm like, "You're probably not eating enough." And they're like, "Huh? What do you mean? I'm not eating enough." I'm like, "You're not eating enough throughout the day." And then when you get home from work, the kids need their stuff. You're exhausted. You've made a million decisions today. You have not eaten enough. And now your body is like banging on the door, like, hey, give me some food. And a lot of times, what our body will crave is something sugary because that's the quickest way to get energy. It wants more energy. You didn't eat enough. And I'm emotional. So I'm not probably making the best choices. And then I have made a lot of choices throughout the day and I'm just tired and I just want to eat something. So I think there's like that happening. And then also when we are stressed, a lot of times there's two ways that I approach stress. It's like chronic and then acute. You might be feeling some kind of way and you might want to fix that with eating your emotions. But then chronically, what I find is like people are not actually implementing ongoing routine things in their life that just make them happy on an ongoing basis. So it's
That's
like
interesting.
you're not filling up your cup, then something happens and then you're like having this acute stress. So you have to tackle it from both ways.
That's so interesting. Um, it had not occurred to me that emotional eating could be as regular as a daily routine. So something that happens at a particular time of day versus something that is situation specific. So I think I've always been aware of emotional eating as, in this situation, I feel bored, or in this situation I feel stressed, and so I'm going to change my eating habits in this way and do emotional eating. But I hadn't thought about it as just like, because my habit is this, by this time of day, my emotions have led me to make these types of eating decisions. That's really interesting. Um, you know, okay, so I have a question.
Mhm,
A question for me. So one thing that I have noticed with myself is that I am the kind of person that will forget to eat.
mhm.
And I have talked about this a little bit on the podcast, where I have to intentionally check in with my body because I will get very stuck in my head otherwise. And so, if I've done a lot of work over the years in order to make sure that I'm doing basic things like staying hydrated and going to the bathroom on a regular basis, because that is how far I will check out of my body, is that I will forget that I'm hungry. I'll forget that I have to use the bathroom until it's an emergency, etc. And so, there are often times where I avoid eating, or I forget to eat, or my reaction to stress is to not eat. Is that considered emotional eating, like the denial of food?
Mm, I don't know. I think that in the traditional sense, I would say no because you're not eating, but I'm the same way. If I get too stressed, I think especially if I'm busy as well, I tend not to eat. Um, but like I said, I think that there are multiple things happening in terms of like your habit and your schedule. Like, for example, the boredom eating. If I'm just bored, I ain't got nothing else to do, and I'm just going into the kitchen, just looking in the refrigerator to see what's in there, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I forgot I had ice cream." Right? It's there.
Relatable.
So, it's environmental, it is, emotional, it is maybe just a lack of awareness as well, and hunger, so there's so many things that are playing, uh, a part in this all at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I last week in so depending on when y'all are listening to this, in last week's episode, I talked about I gave a simple definition for mental health, and I talked about mental health being the part of our well-being that's related to our minds, our emotions, and our relationships. And I kind of see emotional eating as a behavior that sits very nicely in the intersection of our physical health and our mental health. And so I am wondering, from your perspective in your work with clients, what's been the best way for you to help your clients address emotional eating? Do you tackle it based at like as a physical behavior in the environment, or is it more effective to tackle it from a mindset perspective, or does it really require both because it sits at that intersection?
Yes. So one of the things that I do take my clients through is like questions around how was food handled as a kid? Because I think that that's a huge part of it. Is like what we grew up with, we think is completely normal. Like this is just the way it was. And so I've had several clients where they were either appeased with food or they were just allowed to just run amok and just eat whatever that they wanted. And so when they are stressed, they go into their pantry and that 8-year-old girl comes out and she's just like, I just want all the things. And I'm like, okay, who's making the decision here, right? So just bringing to that awareness of like, why, like, where did this come from? Where did this tendency to lean on food and just like have no structure with your food? Where did that come from? Because that lends itself when you do get stressed to you just eating whatever you want, right? So, like, really digging into um, who taught me how to approach food and how I'm eating. And then really planning for the obstacle. You can plan for the obstacle. Number one, we all experience some emotional eating. But if you know for sure that maybe have more like binging tendencies or something like that, really planning and deciding ahead of time in my highest and best self, how would I like to approach this? Like, here's how I'm approaching it now, but like, how would I like to approach it? And if this is the best case scenario, how can I make decisions that move me closer to that ultimate goal of handling it in my highest and best self? And then just ongoing is more about checking in with yourself and really asking yourself, how do I feel? How do I feel? Have I eaten in the last 2 to 4 hours? Yes, I might be stressed or I might be bored, but am I also just hungry? That's really important. Like, have you fed your body in the last 2 to 4 hours? Um, and then, we already set up our environment and our schedule so that we kinda know, like, I should be eating, you know, at these certain times throughout the day. I've already planned my meals. I know what day I plan my meals. I know what day I go grocery shopping. I know what day I might prep. Knowing all that and having those environmental and structural things in place will better support you to make good decisions when you're stressed or when you're lonely or when you're sad because you won't also have a crazy schedule. You won't also be starving and actually be hungry.
That's so good. In last week's episode, I gave a couple of tips, just practical, simple tips to incorporate into our daily lives to support our mental health. And meal prep was actually one of the tips that I suggested, but I did it from the perspective of protecting against those poor eating choices that we make because of decision fatigue.
Right.
Because specifically, I know that that is something that a lot of my audience struggles with, even if they don't know what it is, that a lot of the decisions that we make that literally take us somewhere other than where it is that we have declared we want to go, we make those decisions in the moment because we're making decisions in real time and because we are making decisions at a time when we are not operating from our highest and best self. We have not supported ourselves to operate in that way. And our lizard brain just kind of kicks in and we do what either feels easiest or we do what we think will make us feel good in the immediate moment.
Mhm.
And those things are often very different from the things that we need to do in order to create the life that we have envisioned for ourselves. So it's really important to, I think, see all of the ways that eating can impact not just the way we feel, but ultimately the life that we have.
Right, and not trading what we want right now for what we want most, and that is the choice, and I think that's the biggest aha moment that I try to get my clients to see, is that you have a choice. It's okay for you to feel stressed and not eat. Like, you're not going to implode. Everything is gonna be okay. It's okay to, like, sit with that emotion and just notice that you're feeling it. Everything is going to be okay. And the more that you're able, and that's why I say, like, I help female perfectionists to help to beat self-sabotage, is because the more that I practice being aware of how I feel and what I'm thinking, and I get to decide how I wanna handle this. So, I always tell my clients, it's not about never having the cupcake. I don't ever tell my clients, "Don't eat something." I never tell them that. What I ask them um, is this going to help you further your goals? Are you giving yourself grace right now? How is that going to impact you? Are you okay with the impact? Right. So that self coaching is really important because it's not about not having the cupcake. It's you deciding I'm having the cupcake versus I'm stressed. So I just go eat the cupcake and I'm not aware and I'm not in control. It puts you in the position of power to say when you're going to have something or when you're not going to have something, but you're not doing it just because you're feeling an emotion or you're running away from an emotion.
That's so good. I talk a lot and I've written a lot about the default decisions that we make and how important it is to cultivate the skill of just recognizing when you're making a decision so that you can actually make a decision on purpose that moves you towards where you want to be. Because the decisions that we often make by default, like you said, they tend to rob us of the agency that we have in any moment instead of actually empowering us. That is so good. So, okay, so just the way you were talking about, allowing for the feelings to be there and not having to solve them through food, I think that's a lesson that I have learned more, not so much through trying to manage myself and my own eating habits, but as I've been responsible for feeding my daughter. So I have a 10-year-old daughter, and so I've been responsible for feeding her for a decade. And like all kids, I think it's very easy to reward kids through food.
Mhm.
It's also very easy to see when children are developing themselves kind of an emotional relationship with food, whether it's I'm sad, so I'm going to eat, or I'm bored, so I'm going to eat, or I'm happy, so I'm going to eat. Um, a lot of those things, I think, without needing to tell them that food can make you feel differently, kids figure that out. And especially with sugar, right? Because so many kids' foods are packed with sugar and all the things that give us those quick hits and um, honestly are a bit addictive, right? And so I can remember literally recognizing when my daughter has been bored and so she's asking for a snack and I'm like, wait a minute, I've given you this and this and this already. There's no way that you're hungry. And I tell her, you're just bored and I don't need to solve that for you. Go be bored. Go be bored over there. Go be bored in your room. Go be bored outside. That's fine. You're not going to be bored in the pantry or in the refrigerator.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So good. Okay, so if we don't have to solve for all the feelings with emotional eating, and if we can just allow for those feelings to be there, please tell me what are we doing wrong? What's a bad way to deal with emotional eating?
I just think the if you are unaware, if you're just eating, your schedule is chaotic, you're not progressing towards a goal if you do have like a fitness goal and you just decide I can't do anything about it. And you're literally like giving up your power. I'm really big on that. Like, you get to decide. And if you decide that, hey, if I'm feeling sad, well, I'm just feeling sad. So this just is what happens when I feel sad. I think that's like the biggest thing. The moment that you can recognize that I am in control and that I can choose, then you can practice choosing on purpose. And I think that that is the biggest that one shift will change your life. And I think as well as not labeling yourself. We say, I'm an emotional eater. I'm an emotional eater. I'm an emotional eater. And it's just like, well, you're going to be an emotional eater because you keep repeating, I am an emotional eater. So something that I like to tell my clients is like, okay, so maybe you used to be an emotional eater. right? Even if it was yesterday, I don't care. That was yesterday. And I start to have them think of themselves in two parts as like their old self and then the self that they're becoming. And I want you to spend more time in your language, in your thoughts, talking and thinking thoughts that your highest self is thinking, like the self that you are becoming, that version of you, what is she thinking? She's definitely not thinking, "I'm an emotional eater," because that sentence is a dead end sentence. You can't do anything with that. So I think that's why, we teach our clients like to self coach, to ask ourselves questions like, "Is that true? Do I have to think that way? Is there a better way for me to think about that?" The answers to those questions will change your life. And you only need like a 1% shift. Like I was coaching someone one day and he was like, how do I radically change my mindset? And I'm like, you don't need to radically change your mindset. You need a 1 degree shift, right? If we think about um parallel lines that go on and on forever, up and down. If one of those lines is shifted 1 degree, it's literally going to be in a completely different spot. If it keeps going, it's gonna intersect the other line. You only need a 1 degree shift, that's it. That's the power.
That is so good. You just said so many yummy things right there, and I just have to let all of that marinate. I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge the power of tiny choices applied over a long period of time, right? Because that is essentially what you just said. The
Mhm,
1 degree shift in the moment may just move you 1 degree, but 1 degree applied out, over 365 days is a lot more. The difference and the journey is so much closer to where you want to be versus where you are now. And it's also easier for a lot of us to handle in that way. It's difficult to think about making a big radical shift. And I think, just like you said, there are so many people who never get started because they assume that if they can't make a huge change, it's not worth changing at all.
right.
And the power of even, I think, being motivated to want to change is an important part of the journey of living out change. And so I think we have to acknowledge that wherever it shows up. Um, uh, Something else that you said, you talked about just not calling yourself an emotional eater. I'm a big fan of this. So I did a whole episode earlier this season on self concept. And I talk a lot about in that episode the difference between identifying with the difference between doing a behavior, having a behavior or a habit versus identifying yourself and your identity with that behavior or with that habit. And I think I started there with this podcast when I first introduced myself as a recovering perfectionist. So I no longer identify as a perfectionist. I no longer identify as a procrastinator. I no longer identify as an overachiever because those things don't serve me as an identity. That is not who I am, and it's not who I desire to be. And I can acknowledge the fact that I can engage in certain actions and it doesn't have to dictate who I am. And
Mhm.
when you can see the difference between who you are and what you do, you create the space and the opportunity for transformational change.
Yes, I love that. One thing that you said that stuck out was, um, when you're talking about yourself and you're labeling yourself, it is I talk I give this example. There are 2 people who are smoking. They're trying to quit smoking. The first person is offered a cigarette and they say, "No, sorry, I'm trying to quit smoking." And the second person says, "No, I'm not a smoker." And at the end of the day, they're both trying to quit smoking, but one of them is still identifying as someone who's trying to quit versus embodying this idea that I am no longer a smoker, even if you slip up and you smoke sometimes, right? Like I tell people all the time, I identify as a self-disciplined person. You can't tell me that I'm not self-disciplined. I love the word self-discipline. I know that's really weird and most people think it's really
Same.
restrictive,
I'm a
but
fan.
Yes. Oh my god. People think it's restrictive. I think it is power. Like, I lean into the power, I lean into the love, and I love it. And you might catch me for 3 months out of the year, and I haven't been to the gym one time. And I don't care. You can't tell me that I'm not self-disciplined, because when I zoom out, I have shown up for myself year after year. So, it's, like, really what you identify with. So you can let the "I'm an emotional eater" go. And then who are you without that label? That will change your life.
Ooh, y'all, I'm gonna give y'all a homework assignment. Journal on that. Who
Yes.
are you without the label of being an emotional eater? So good.
Yes.
All right. Let's land this plane a little bit. Tell me before we go. I've had so much fun, by the way, with this conversation. I feel
Same.
like we could go all day.
We could.
But our listeners have other things they need to do, including feeding yourselves, y'all.
Right.
Make sure you've eaten today, right? Okay.
Amen.
So Coach Steph, what is if there's one tip you could offer to our listeners, or maybe one thing you could give us all to look out for when it comes to our eating habits and our mental health, what's one thing you want to leave us with?
I would say this, number 1, you're not bad if you have engaged or if you have labeled yourself as an emotional eater, because that just piles on guilt on top of that. Number 2, I know you said one thing, but I have a couple. Another thing would be just increasing your awareness and asking yourself, "How do I feel?" And then create a simple schedule for yourself so that, you're not hungry on top of that. That's what I'll leave you with.
That's so good. That's so good. So helpful. Y'all, I hope that part of what you've taken today from this conversation with Coach Steph is that we have all engaged in emotional eating. And as long as we continue to have emotions and as long as we continue to need to eat, we will probably continue to experience emotional eating. And we don't have to label ourselves and identify with emotional eating as the entire basis of our relationship with food. And you don't have to make huge radical changes. You can make a 1 degree shift and create transformational change with your relationship with food and with your body. That is so awesome. Coach Steph, tell the people where they can find you if they want to learn more. You know what? Wait, before you tell the people, I'm going to tell the people.
Okay.
Coach Steph has a podcast. I am a fan. I listen to her podcast. That's actually how I knew that she would be a great guest for this show because we have a similar perspective on mindset. So I don't know if the things that she was talking about sounded familiar. That is because we have a similar approach when it comes to mindset. So I am definitely a fan of your podcast. It is called the Fit Figure
Figure formula.
Formula.
Yes.
Yes. And that is available everywhere you can get podcasts.
Absolutely.
Totally. I will make sure that I link that up in the show notes. Beyond your podcast, where can we find you?
I hang out on Facebook, so you can find me. I go live every single week giving trainings on macros and mindset in my Facebook group, Weight Loss for Perfectionists.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, don't forget next week, no, yes, next week, we will have in June, my first episode in June will be an Ask Me Anything episode. So if you have questions that you would like a professional life coach to weigh in on, get your questions in. It's free. It is as anonymous as you want it to be, and nothing is off limits. The link to the form to submit your question is in the show notes. Again, Coach Steph, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks
Have
for
a
having me.
great day, everybody. Bye.